He told her never to come back. 6 years later, two starving twin girls walked into a diner asking for leftover bread, and the billionaire who once broke their mother's heart saw his own eyes staring back. That night, under a raging storm, fate demanded he finally come home. Rain had been falling since noon, turning Portland's streets into silver rivers that swallowed the city's glow. Along the Willamette rows of paper lanterns swayed over the Saturday night market tiny suns trembling in the mist. Beneath their flicker, Sterling Rowe, 35, sat alone at a corner stall, his coat collar pulled high, his bowl of pho gone cold. He used to own nights like this, deals champagne headlines, but now his silence was the only empire left. Steam curled from nearby food trucks, and somewhere a street violin sang a half-remembered lullaby. Across the lot, the wind caught a blue lantern and dragged it low. Sterling reached out, steadying it with a gloved hand. Light spilled across his wristwatch, engraved initials MC. He looked away fast, as if memory itself could burn. That's when he heard it, "Ma'am. Do you have any bread ends left?" Two small silhouettes stood at the edge of the truck line, girls maybe 5, drenched in rain, wearing mismatched coats. The taller one held the younger's hand. Both trembled but stood straight, proud. The vendor shook her head, pity softening her eyes. Sterling turned. Something about them froze him, the curve of their cheeks, the same brown eyes he saw every morning in the mirror. The older whispered again, voice cracking, "We can pay with buttons." She opened a tiny palm, 2 nickels, 1 button, and a folded paper lantern. The vendor hesitated. Sterling rose. His chair scraped the wet pavement. "You girls like grilled cheese." They turned toward him, startled. For a heartbeat under the bleeding glow of the lanterns, Sterling Rowe thought the universe had sent his past, back wearing raincoats and hope. The food truck's awning rattled under the wind. Sterling knelt beside the girls, rain dripping from his hair onto the pavement. The older one, Lila, stood stiff, chin lifted, guarding her sister like a tiny soldier. The younger Wren hid half behind her coat sleeve, eyes wide as the lantern light flickered across her wet curls. "You don't have to pay with buttons," Sterling said softly. "How about grilled cheese instead?" Lila frowned. "We're not supposed to talk to strangers. Good rule," he said, trying to smile. "Then maybe I'm not a stranger anymore. My name's Sterling." The younger whispered, "That's shiny, like stars." He laughed low and hoarse, surprised at the sound of his own voice. "Yeah, maybe. Stars work hard to stay bright." The vendor handed him 2 paper cups of tomato soup. Sterling slid a sandwich onto each, steam wrapped around them like mercy. The girls hesitated, eyes darting to the coins still in their hand. Lila set them carefully on the counter. "Mama says kindness isn't free." Sterling froze. That word Mama hung in the rain like thunder waiting to strike. He crouched lower, meeting her eyes. "She also say it's okay to be warm when it's cold." Wren's lip trembled. "She says, warmth is what people forget to share." The sentence cracked something inside him. For a long second he couldn't breathe. Same phrasing, same rhythm. He'd heard it once before in another storm from another voice. The lantern above them flickered bleeding gold across the puddles. Lila tore her sandwich in half and pushed one piece toward her sister. "Eat, Wren. Mama would want us full." And in that quiet, Sterling realized he wasn't looking at charity. He was looking straight at his own blood. Inside the small diner, warmth hit like a gentle wave. The rain had turned the windows into watercolor streaks of silver melting into amber light. The jukebox hummed a slow blues tune that seemed too big for the room. Sterling guided the girls to a corner booth, their boots squeaking against the floor. Steam rose from 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, cheese melting in golden threads, the smell wrapping around them like a blanket. Wren climbed into the seat, eyes wide. "It smells like heaven," she whispered. "Eat slow," Sterling said softly. "Your stomach's small, but brave." Lila watched him, suspicious but hungry. Why are you helping us? He hesitated. Because you asked nicely. The older twin tilted her head, still measuring him. Mama says people help when they remember they're human. Her words hit him square in the chest. He almost asked the name Mama, who but fear made him swallow it. Instead, he nodded. Your mama sounds smart. Wren smiled, digging into the sandwich with tiny shaking hands. Crumbs clung to her cheeks. Sterling couldn't stop watching the curve of her mouth, the shape of her nose. Familiar, haunting. From her coat pocket, Lila pulled out a wrinkled paper lantern, its corners damp but carefully folded. She placed it in the center of the table. Mama made this, she said. We light them when she can't sleep. She says paper remembers light even after it's gone. The diner's neon sign flickered outside, blue to gold, gold to blue. Sterling reached out, then stopped halfway, afraid to touch something sacred. Paper remembers light. He looked at their faces, the same soft freckle under the left eye, and suddenly the room felt too small for what his heart already knew. The lantern between them trembled as the heater clicked on. The waxy paper caught the light and shimmered faintly blue, then gold, like a pulse that refused to die. Sterling couldn't look away. Something about it clawed at the locked parts of his memory. He cleared his throat, forcing casual curiosity. Your mama, she sounds like someone special. Lila nodded without hesitation. She is. Her name's Maeve Carter. The sound hit him like a hammer through glass. For a moment he didn't breathe. The world stuttered, the hiss of the coffee machine, the low hum of the jukebox, all vanished into the same silence that had followed a slammed door 6 years ago. Maeve. The name he'd once loved so hard, it burned everything around it. The name he'd spat like poison the night he told her never to come back. He blinked, trying to find words, but the girls kept talking, unaware that their voices were rewriting his heartbeat. She's sick sometimes, Wren said, swinging her legs. But she says not to worry because stars never really go away. They just hide until we remember to look up. Lila chimed in. She paints too when her cough isn't bad. The lights we sell at the market, Mama makes them from old paper. She says nothing deserves to be thrown away if it can still glow. Sterling's throat closed. He remembered the last fight, the rain, her suitcase half-zipped, his pride too loud to hear her crying. He'd thought she'd left for good, vanishing into a city that forgot people fast. But she hadn't. She'd been here making light out of scraps, raising them. He rubbed his palms against his knees, hiding the tremor. You said, she coughs, sometimes, Lila answered. The doctor wanted her to rest, but Mama says work feeds us. She's resting tonight, though. Said we could walk here for bread before the rain gets angry. Sterling stared out the window. The rain was angry now, slashing sideways, beating against the glass, like regret trying to get in. The waitress brought napkins, whispering cute kids. They from around here? Lila nodded politely. 3 blocks down near Alberta. Apartment with the green window. Sterling almost laughed. His company's office tower stood less than a mile from that address. He'd driven past it 1,000 times, never knowing the ghosts inside. He rose abruptly, fishing a 20 from his wallet, his pulse a drum in his ears. You'll need an umbrella, he said, voice unsteady. We don't mind rain, Wren whispered. Mama says rain is just the sky, remembering how to cry. He froze. The exact same line Maeve had once murmured the night her father died. His hand shook as he folded the bill, slipping it under their plate. Take it anyway, he said. Buy her medicine. Lila's brows furrowed. We can't, she said, never take more than kindness. Sterling's breath hitched, then call it kindness returned. Outside, lightning split the clouds. The blue glow from the diner's sign bled across the twins' faces, painting them in his own color. For a heartbeat, it was like staring into a mirror made of memory, 2 reflections of everything he'd tried to bury. The waitress leaned close, whispering, Sir, you all right? He didn't answer. He was already on his feet, coat half on, eyes fixed on the door. Because somewhere in that green-windowed apartment, Maeve Carter was still alive. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to be late. The street had emptied into rivers of silver. Portland's midnight rain was relentless, sweeping the city clean of sound. Sterling followed a few paces behind the twins, afraid that if he blinked, they might disappear back into the storm. Lila led the way, her hand tight around her sister's. Every few steps, she checked the street numbers, counting softly, like a map only she could read. Wren skipped puddles, her boots leaving two uneven prints that the rain quickly erased. "You sure you know the way?" Sterling asked, his voice low, careful not to startle them. Lila nodded. "We always walk it. Mama says brave girls don't get lost, just delayed." He almost smiled. That was Maeve, all over defiance stitched into tenderness. They turned down Alberta Street, where the market stalls now stood empty tarps, flapping like tired wings. Neon signs flickered out one by one, until only the faint glow of hanging paper lanterns remained blue, pink, yellow. Some were half-torn, others waterlogged, but they still burned softly in the rain. Each one had a child's scrawl in marker, "Wish you better, Mama. No more cough. We love you 3 times. Sterling slowed his breath, catching. She'd been here every night selling light to strangers while her body gave out. Wren turned, suddenly holding up a small red lantern that had come loose from a string. "It broke," she said, frowning. He knelt, gently cupping the soaked paper. "It's not broken," he whispered. "It just needs someone to hold it a while." Her face softened. "That's what Mama says about people." The words hit harder than rain. By the time they reached the cracked brick building with a flickering green window, Sterling's coat was drenched, but his chest burned with something fierce and alive. Lila pointed upward. "That's home. Mama's resting." He looked up, saw a faint shadow moving behind the fogged glass, heard a cough carried through the rain. "Go on," he said gently, handing them the lantern. "Tell her light made it home." As the girls ran upstairs, the glow of the red paper pulsed through the stairwell window, soft, steady, forgiving. And Sterling Rowe stood outside in the downpour, realizing for the first time what regret could look like when it still had hope. The hallway smelled of damp wood and boiled medicine. Sterling climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking like it remembered better days. At the top landing, a single bulb swung from the ceiling, throwing a nervous circle of light. He hesitated outside apartment 3B, heart hammering in sync with the rain on the windows. The girls pushed the door open, their tiny voices carrying inside. "Mama, we brought food." The air that greeted him was warm, but heavy, like the room itself was struggling to breathe. A space heater coughed near a peeling wall. Paint had bubbled from moisture, and in the corner a bucket caught drips from a leak in the ceiling. On the old couch beneath a thin blanket lay Maeve Carter. Her hair, once wildfire red, had dimmed to rusted chestnut. Her skin gleamed with fever, sweat, lips cracked, breathing shallow. Yet when her eyes fluttered open at the sound of her daughters, they still held that soft blue that used to undo him. "Hey, my stars," she whispered. Her voice rasped, but it glowed anyway. "Did you find dinner? We did?" Wren chirped. The shiny man helped Maeve smiled faintly until her gaze shifted to the doorway. To him. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Rain, breath, pulse, all tangled into silence. "Sterling," she said, barely above a whisper. His name fractured in her mouth, halfway between surprise and disbelief. He stepped forward slowly, guilt dragging at every movement. "You shouldn't be alive." She let out a small, dry laugh that turned into a cough so violent it bent her forward. Lila rushed to steady her, but Sterling was already kneeling, catching her shoulders. Her skin burned beneath his touch. "You're burning up," he said. "You need a hospital." Maeve shook her head, catching her breath. "Hospitals need money. Money needs pride. I ran out of both." He swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have to beg for care." "I'm not begging," she said sharply. "I'm surviving. There's a difference. The room fell still. The twins stood near the radiator watching the two adults who spoke like thunder about to break. I didn't know, Sterling whispered. About them. About you. Maeve's eyes softened, but the anger didn't vanish. It flickered beneath exhaustion. You didn't want to know. You built walls made of numbers. It's easier not to hear someone you've hurt if you drown her in silence. He couldn't argue. He had drowned her in pride, in work, in the cruel illusion that success erased mistakes. She coughed again, hand trembling, as she reached for the paper lantern hanging above the couch. These, she said, voice fading, are what kept us warm when the heater broke. Light costs less than forgiveness. Sterling looked around, paper lanterns strung across the ceiling, glowing faintly, breathing with the shadows. Each one had a message scrawled in crayon, "Good night, Mama. We're brave. Stars don't fall, they wait." Something inside him cracked open. I can fix this, he said desperately. Maeve's head turned slightly, eyes closing halfway. You don't fix people, Sterling. You stand beside them while they fix themselves. He didn't answer. He was already pulling out his phone. You need help tonight. No hospitals, she whispered again, her words slurring now. They treat money before they treat people. Her breathing hitched, too fast, too shallow. Maeve. He grabbed her hand, feeling the heat pulse against his palm. Her lashes, fluttered eyes, barely open. Don't wake the girls, she murmured, sinking deeper into the pillow. They dream better when they think the world's kind. He pressed his forehead to her hand, voice trembling. Then let me make it kind again. Outside, thunder rolled through Portland, shaking the window pane. Inside, the lanterns swayed, gold light brushing against the fever glass of her skin. And Sterling Rowe realized the storm he needed to survive wasn't outside at all. It was everything he'd left unfinished in this room. The heater hummed like a tired heart. Shadows from the lanterns swayed across the peeling wallpaper, tiny constellations trembling in the dark. Sterling sat on the edge of the coffee table, elbows on his knees, watching Maeve breathe in ragged fits. She opened her eyes slowly, voice rough. You shouldn't be here. He answered softly. You said that once before. I listened. Look what it cost. Maeve let out a dry, humorless laugh that turned into another cough. You think showing up now erases 6 years? You think pity fixes pneumonia? It's not pity. He leaned forward, desperate, steady. It's responsibility. That's what people call guilt when they can afford it. Silence dropped between them. Wren peeked from behind the arm of the couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes darting between them. Lila stood protectively in front of her sister, just like her mother once did for him, ready to absorb the hurt. Sterling lowered his voice. You're sick. Let me help. You need real medicine, not candlelight and courage? Maeve's eyes sharpened. Those two things kept us alive long enough for you to notice. Her words landed like stones. He rubbed a hand over his face, rainwater and guilt blurring into one. I didn't know where you went. You didn't look. Her tone cracked. Not cruel, just bone-tired truth. The room fell silent except for the patter of rain against glass. From the corner, Lila spoke small but firm. Mama, he brought us food. He's nice. Maeve looked at her daughters, her anger wilting under their trust. Kindness isn't a currency, sweetheart, she murmured. It's a choice. And sometimes it costs. Sterling swallowed hard. Then let me pay it. Maeve studied him for a long moment, searching for the man she'd once believed in. You can't buy forgiveness, Sterling. I'm not trying to. He reached for her trembling hand. I'm asking to earn it. Her fingers twitched, almost pulling away, then stilled. The fever shimmered on her skin. For the first time that night, she didn't say no, and that quiet, fragile silence between them felt louder than the thunder outside. By midnight, the storm had turned the city into a trembling map of sirens and shadows. The Willamette roared beneath collapsing clouds, thunder cracking through rooftops like broken bones. From the apartment window, the sky looked bruised, lightning slicing it open again and again. Maeve stirred on the couch, fever slick and pale. The twins had fallen asleep in a pile of blankets, lantern light flickering over their faces. Sterling paced the room like a trapped animal. His phone kept buzzing weather alerts, flood warnings, bridge closures. Then came the emergency tone that froze the blood in his veins. Steel bridge collapse. All lanes closed. Power grid compromised. The lights blinked once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed the apartment. Only the soft golden hum of the paper lanterns remained glowing like stubborn stars, refusing to go out. Maeve Sterling said, voice steady but shaking underneath. "We have to move. Now." Her eyelids fluttered. "The storm isn't our biggest problem anymore. You can't breathe in this heat." He grabbed his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders, and looked for the twins. Wren whimpered as he lifted her from the floor. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "We're going somewhere safe." Maeve tried to sit up, her body trembling under its own weight. Sterling stopped. He turned fierce now. "No. I stopped 6 years ago. I'm not stopping again." For a second, the storm outside seemed to pause as if listening. Then the wind screamed through the cracked window, scattering rain across the lanterns. One of them caught fire at the corner, flared, then died in smoke. Maeve's breathing quickened. "The girls, they're fine." He checked their pulses with trembling fingers, then scooped Maeve into his arms. She felt lighter than memory, fragile as paper. Down the stairwell, water leaked from the ceiling, every step slick. The emergency lights flickered red, painting the walls like they were bleeding. Outside, the city had lost its glow. Streetlights sparked and died one by one. Neon signs drowned under the rain. The only illumination came from the red and blue strobes of distant ambulances reflecting on the river. Sterling's SUV sat under a street lamp that flickered like a dying heartbeat. He strapped the girls into the back seat, then helped Maeve into the passenger side. Her cough tore through the noise of rain on metal. "You shouldn't." He slammed the door before she could finish. "Tell me later." As he turned the key, the engine sputtered, then roared alive, headlights cutting through sheets of water. Outside, debris floated like ghosts, plastic bins, a toppled sign, someone's lost jacket. He gripped the wheel. "Hold on." Maeve pressed her forehead to the cold glass eyes, half open, whispering between breaths. "You always did drive through storms." He managed a tight smile. "And you always told me when to slow down." The tires sliced through flooded streets, wipers screaming across the windshield. Behind them, a transformer exploded, painting the sky white for half a second. Wren cried out in the back seat, and Sterling reached one hand behind him until he found her fingers. "I've got you," he said. "I swear I've got you." The bridge loomed ahead, or what was left of it. Steel twisted into the black water cables hanging like ribs. Police barricades blinked weakly under the downpour. Sterling turned onto the side road toward Portland General Hospital, the last building on the hill, still glowing with backup generators. Inside the SUV, Maeve coughed again, wet, sharp, brutal. The girls clung to each other in silence, and as thunder split the sky one more time, Sterling realized this storm wasn't just weather. It was every mistake he'd ever made demanding to be faced head-on. So he pressed harder on the gas. The hospital parking lot was a battlefield of flashing lights and flooded asphalt. Nurses in ponchos rushed through the storm, guiding stretchers under tarps, while the generator hummed somewhere deep inside the building. Sterling skidded to a stop near the emergency ramp, jumped out, and yanked the passenger door open. Maeve slumped sideways, breath-rattling skin hot against the freezing rain. He lifted her in both arms, his suit soaked through boots, splashing through knee-deep water. "Critical intake," he shouted over the wind. "Severe fever, respiratory distress, pneumonia." A nurse in goggles and gloves waved them toward triage. Name Maeve Carter. He answered, then, without thinking, added private coverage. All of it. He pulled a black metal card from his coat, rain dripping off its edges. Whatever she needs. The nurse's eyes widened. Understood, sir. Follow me. They slid Maeve onto a gurney. Her fingers twitched, reaching blindly for her daughter's. Stay. Close, she murmured, before the doors swung shut and swallowed her into the chaos of the ICU. Sterling stood frozen for a beat, chest heaving until he felt small hands tugging at his sleeve. Lila and Wren were shivering, their faces ghost pale under the fluorescent glare. Will Mama wake up? Wren asked, voice breaking. He crouched to their level, forcing his tone to calm. She will. The doctors are helping her right now. But she looked scared, Lila whispered. He swallowed hard, fighting the sting behind his eyes. Sometimes grown-ups are scared too. The trick is being brave anyway. Wren's lip trembled. Mama says brave people cry when they need to. That hit him harder than any storm. He smiled weakly. Then your mama's the bravest person I know. They sat together on the hard plastic bench, the hum of machines echoing from beyond the ICU glass. Outside, the storm still battered the city, but in here, amid antiseptic and exhaustion, 3 small hearts beat in time with the sound of hope trying to live. Sterling leaned his head against the wall, whispering to himself, I won't leave again. The fluorescent lights above the waiting room buzzed like wasps, steady and cruel. The storm had quieted outside, but inside Sterling's mind, thunder still rolled. He hadn't moved from his seat. His coat hung heavy with rain, his hair plastered to his temples. Across the hallway through the narrow glass window, he could see Maeve, still pale oxygen mask fogging with each fragile breath. The twins had finally fallen asleep on the bench beside him, curled together beneath a nurse's spare blanket. He stared at them for a long time, then at his shaking hands. He'd signed 1,000 contracts, acquired empires, but never signed anything that mattered more than this night. His phone buzzed again. Vance Kettering, COO. Sterling hesitated, then answered. Jesus Rowe. Vance's voice snapped through static. You vanish in the middle of a PR meltdown, and now there's a photo of you at Portland General holding some woman in a rainstorm, the board's in chaos. What the hell are you doing? Sterling's voice came out low, steady as steel. Saving what's mine. Yours, Vance scoffed. We covered that Brooks settlement years ago. You signed it yourself, wired her off with hush money, and Sterling froze. What settlement? There was a beat of silence. Don't play dumb. The HR files the non-disclosure you authorized when she went rogue, Maeve Carter, right? His pulse spiked. Send me the document. Vance hesitated, voice tightening. Sterling, it's confidential. Now he barked. The call ended. Seconds later, an email pinged through. Sterling opened it, scrolling fast. There it was, company letterhead, digital signature, Sterling Rowe, dated 6 years ago. Subject line, containment, Maeve Carter. Payment issued. Settlement accepted. Termination closed. Except, he had never seen it. His heart pounded as he zoomed in on the signature. The edges were jagged, pixelated. A fake. His name, his reputation had been used to destroy her. A low, dangerous calm spread through his chest. He scrolled further, reading the header trail. Each approval linked to Vance's encrypted server. Even the timestamp aligned with the week Sterling had been overseas for the Tokyo merger. He stood abruptly. The nurse behind the desk looked up, startled. Sir, please. He ignored her phone, pressed to his ear again. Vance. The man's voice returned, oily, controlled. Sterling, listen. No, you listen. His voice sharpened, every syllable cutting clean. You forged my signature to silence her. You made me think she'd left because she wanted to. Do you have any idea what your scandal would have cost the company? Vance snapped. The board wanted her gone. I made it painless. Painless. Sterling's knuckles whitened. She was working night shifts with pneumonia, raising my daughters on scrap paper and rainwater. Static crackled on the line. Vance finally said, "If you go public with this, you'll tank your own empire." Sterling turned toward the ICU window, watching Maeve's chest rise and fall. "Then let it burn," he whispered. He hung up. For a long moment, he just stood there, the hum of machines mixing with the thunder outside. Then he opened his contacts and hit Legal Division, direct line. "This is Rowe," he said. His voice didn't shake. "Pull every document signed under Kettering's ID in the last 6 years. Full audit, full trace, no redactions. I want his access revoked, his office sealed, and a criminal complaint filed before dawn." The voice on the other end stammered, "Sir, that's do it." When he ended the call, the weight in his chest eased just enough for him to breathe. He looked again at the window, Maeve still fighting, the twins sleeping safe. The storm outside might have been ending, but the reckoning he'd unleashed had only just begun. By dawn, the storm had thinned into a ghost rain, now only whispering against the hospital glass. The world outside looked washed raw, as if Portland had been rebuilt from silver and ash. But inside room 214, nothing was clean yet. Sterling stood by the window phone pressed to his ear, his reflection fractured by streaks of water. Across the room, Maeve lay unconscious under the soft beep of monitors. The twins slept beside her bed, two small bundles of breath and hope. "Connect me to the board," he said flatly. "Now." A click. Then a flurry of voices, half asleep executives patched into a video call. "Sterling," a woman's voice began. "Good God, it's 5 a.m. Then you're awake enough to listen." His tone was ice over steel. "You'll see an emergency directive hitting your inbox in 60 seconds. Effective immediately, Graham Vance is suspended pending investigation for corporate forgery and fraud." A murmur rippled through the line. "You can't do that unilaterally," another voice snapped. "Watch me." He opened his laptop on the windowsill, pulling up a folder labeled Audit Chain Auth Logs. Dozens of screenshots filled the screen, digital signatures, timestamps, IP traces. Every forged file led back to one name, Vance Kettering. "I have 6 years of falsified authorizations, doctored settlements, and illegal payouts," Sterling said coldly. "All under my name. You'll also find evidence that one of those settlements targeted a former employee who never accepted a cent and nearly died because of it." "Sterling, you're emotional," someone tried. "Let legal handle legal is already on it. I'm handling the truth." He turned, eyes landing on Maeve's sleeping form. The monitors blinked, steady, fragile as candlelight. "This company was built to build light," he said softly, then looked back to the screen. "Instead, it's been feeding on shadows. That ends now." Another voice, a familiar one, cut through. Rowe said, Vance himself suddenly joining the call. His face appeared grainy in the dim light of his office. "You think you can bury me with screenshots? I don't bury trash," Sterling said. "I take it to the fire," Vance sneered. "You'll burn with it. You think investors will forgive a scandal like this? You're walking away from billions." Sterling's jaw tightened. "I've already walked away from everything that ever mattered once." "Not again. Don't be a fool." He clicked end call. The line went dead. Silence filled the room again, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of oxygen. Sterling stared at the screen a long moment before typing one last email to the press liaison, to compliance, to the SEC inbox flagged urgent. He attached the logs and wrote 4 words in the subject line. "No more quiet crimes." He hit send. His hands trembled. For the first time in years, it wasn't from fear but release. He turned to the window. The rain had stopped. The first weak sunlight fractured through the clouds, brushing across the hospital floor in soft gold. Behind him, Maeve stirred faintly in her sleep, a sigh escaping her lips. The twins shifted under their blanket, whispering in dreams. Sterling whispered to the light, as if confessing to it. "Whatever burns, burns clean." And somewhere in a downtown boardroom, still flickering with screens, the fire he'd called began to spread. The dawn that had promised calm lasted only minutes. Somewhere deep in the hospital's belly, a fuse blew with a crack that echoed through the vents. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered to darkness. A nurse's shout pierced the corridor. "Generators down, keep the criticals stable." Sterling's head snapped toward Maeve's room. The monitors sputtered, then flatlined to black screens. For half a heartbeat, the world stopped breathing. He bolted for the door. "Backup power where East Wing," a nurse yelled, already running with a flashlight. "We have to move her manually before the oxygen tanks drain." Sterling turned to the twins, who were just waking, eyes wide in the dim glow. "Listen to me," he said, crouching. "You stay with Nurse Kelly. Don't leave this hallway until I say so." Ren clutched his sleeve. "But Mama, I've got her," he said. "I promise." He didn't wait for permission. He swung into the room, found Maeve, half-conscious, oxygen mask, hissing weakly. Her skin gleamed with sweat, her chest rising too fast. The only light came from the morning sun struggling through rain-streaked windows and the small red lantern the girls had hung above her bed. Its glow painted her face in fragile gold. "Maeve," he whispered, "I need you to hold on." Her eyelids fluttered. "Still, saving the world." He smiled tightly. "Just my part of it." He slid his arms beneath her, careful of the IV lines, and lifted. She was impossibly light. The machines around them beeped their dying protest. Outside the hall was chaos, orderlies shouting, stretchers moving through half-light. Somewhere down the corridor, a ceiling tile crashed to the floor. Stairs, a nurse barked, flashlight trembling in her grip. "Elevators are dead." Sterling nodded and started down the narrow concrete stairwell. Each step shuddered underfoot, echoing like a heartbeat. Halfway down, the flashlight failed. Darkness closed in, complete and suffocating. Then a faint glow bloomed behind him. Here, Lila's voice, small but fierce. She stood at the landing above, holding the red paper lantern in both hands, its flame steady despite the drafts. Ren gripped her arm, eyes bright with fear and courage tangled together. Sterling's throat tightened. "Good girls. Keep it high." They descended together, the man carrying their mother, the daughters carrying the light. The lantern's reflection rippled along the metal railings, a tiny defiant sun leading them through the dark. When they reached the lower floor, nurses rushed forward with portable oxygen tanks. Sterling laid Maeve on the waiting gurney, his hands shaking, lungs burning, vitals dropping. Someone shouted, "We're losing her." "Hold the line," Sterling said hoarsely, pressing the mask tighter to Maeve's face until the hiss of oxygen returned. "You hear me, Maeve? Stay with me. The world still owes you mourning." Her pulse monitor flickered, beeped once, then again, weak but alive. The nurse exhaled. "She's stabilizing." Sterling leaned against the wall, drenched in sweat, trembling from exhaustion. Across the ward, the twins still clutched the lantern between them. Its light wavered but didn't die. He crossed to them, knelt, and touched their shoulders. "You two just saved her." Ren blinked. "No," she whispered. "Mama saved herself. We just brought the light." He smiled, eyes wet. "Then maybe that's what saving really is." Outside, the backup generators finally roared back to life. The ward lights flared on blinding white. But for Sterling, nothing shone brighter than the trembling red glow still burning in those little hands. The emergency ward had gone still, the chaos dissolving into a fragile quiet. Nurses moved softly between beds, their footsteps echoing under the steady hum of restored power. The scent of antiseptic clung to the air, but beneath it lingered something gentler, paper and wax, the faint sweetness of survival. Sterling sat on the floor beside Maeve's gurney, his back against the wall, breathing like he'd just outrun the world. The twins curled up on either side of him, the red lantern resting in Ren's lap. Its glow had dimmed, but refused to die, a small sun cradled by small hands. For the first time all night, no one spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of heartbeat sounds of breaths that mattered. Then Wren broke it. Mama didn't wake up. She will, Sterling said gently. She's just tired from fighting too long. Lila turned the lantern slowly, watching its flicker chase shadows across the wall. When the lights went out, I thought maybe she'd go away too. She didn't, he murmured. She followed the light you carried. The girl looked up at him. You mean this one? No, he said softly, touching her chest. That one. Wren leaned against him, eyelids heavy. Mama says stars hide when they're scared. And he asked. She says if you wait long enough, they come back. Sterling smiled faintly. Then we'll wait. The girl's breathing slowed, syncing with the steady pulse of the monitor. Across the room, Maeve stirred faintly, just enough for her fingers to twitch toward them. Sterling reached over, linking her hand with the girl's small ones, weaving their fingers together like threads of light. For a long moment, he just watched this fragile constellation, born from pain and paper lanterns. He whispered, barely audible, "You brought her home." And in that warm, dim corner of the hospital, the family he'd once lost began quietly, stubbornly, to take shape again. Morning crept through the high windows, pale and uncertain, dusting the ward in muted gold. Maeve was sleeping again, her fever easing, but Sterling couldn't sit still. He rose quietly, stepping out into the empty corridor. The hum of the generators had softened to a low purr. The world outside was finally calm, and yet inside him, the storm was still raging. He walked toward the small chapel at the end of the hall, a forgotten place filled with flickering candles and the faint smell of wax and rain. The air tasted of old prayers. He sat in the front pew, elbows on his knees, and stared at the stained glass. Every color reminded him of a night he'd spent trying to forget. 6 years ago, the mansion at the edge of the river. A storm just like this one. Maeve, standing in the doorway, her coat soaked, her voice breaking. "I didn't lie to you, Sterling. You just didn't want the truth." He'd been younger then, angry, unbending. He remembered the contract folder on the table, the headlines about his IPO, the cold fear of scandal. He remembered her hand reaching for his and his own pulling away. "You used me," he'd said. "I loved you," she'd answered. "Don't come back." The sound of the door slamming had echoed through years of success, but not once had it sounded like victory. Now in the dim chapel, he pressed his palms together and whispered the words that pride had strangled. "I'm sorry." It came out broken. But it was real. Footsteps behind him, soft, hesitant. He turned. Lila stood in the doorway, still in her hospital gown, holding the red lantern from earlier. It glowed faintly in her hands. "Mom woke up a little," she said quietly. "She asked where you went." Sterling swallowed the lump in his throat. "I just needed air. She said you always leave when things get quiet." That pierced deeper than any accusation. He crouched to her level eyes, level with hers. "Not this time, Lila." She studied his face for a long moment, as if weighing the truth in his eyes. "Mama says people can change if they remember why they started being kind." He smiled through the ache. "Then I guess I just remembered." Lila nodded solemnly and held out the lantern. "You should take this. It's for when the light gets scared again." He took it carefully, the paper warm from her hands. "Thank you," he whispered. Back in Maeve's room, she was awake, weak but lucid. Her eyes met his across the sterile light. No words, just quiet recognition. He placed the lantern on her bedside table, its glow spilling over the three of them. "I carried you down the stairs last night," he said softly. 6 floors. Every step felt like the years I wasted. Maeve's lips curved faintly. Still trying to save everything, he shook his head. "No. Just what's left." Outside, the last shards of snow began to melt from the windowsills. The city was exhaling, and for the first time in years, Sterling felt lighter, not because the winter had ended, but because he was finally carrying it with both hands instead of running from it. The peace didn't last long. By mid-morning, the hospital room door burst open, and a gust of cold air followed the man who entered. He was short, heavy-set, his coat dripping rain onto the tile, his face red with anger and impatience. "Miss Carter," he barked, ignoring the children. "I've been calling for days. The city inspector's coming. That building's condemned. You owe 3 months' rent, and they want everyone out by Friday." Maeve flinched against the pillows. Her voice was thin. "Mr. Doyle, please." "No more please," he snapped, slamming a wrinkled notice onto the side table. "You people think sympathy pays bills. I told you no more extensions." Sterling stood slowly. He hadn't slept, hadn't even shaved, but when he straightened, the room seemed to narrow around him. "Who are you?" Doyle demanded. "I'm the man who's going to make you wish you'd learned manners," Sterling said quietly. He picked up the notice, glanced at it once, then pulled out his phone. Doyle's bluster wavered. "Hey, look, I didn't mean..." Sterling was already speaking into the receiver. "M. Hayes wire, a transfer to 1453 Alberta Street, full balance, plus triple arrears. Then schedule emergency repairs, heating, plumbing, insulation, and hire local tenants as crew." He looked up at Doyle, eyes cold. "And make sure this man is paid to leave early." The landlord blinked, confusion replacing rage. "Wait." What? Sterling stepped closer until the man could smell the hospital disinfectant on his coat. "You'll treat those tenants like people, or I'll buy the building out from under you before lunch. Your choice." Doyle's mouth opened, then closed. You can't just..." "I just did." For a heartbeat, even the monitors seemed to hold their breath. Then Doyle stumbled backward, muttering something incoherent before disappearing into the hall. Sterling turned back to Maeve, who was staring at him, stunned. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He sat down beside her bed, voice steady. "Yes, I did. You've spent 6 years paying for my silence. It's my turn to pay for your peace." Maeve looked at him for a long moment, eyes glistening, the faintest ghost of a smile trembling on her lips. "Maybe," she said softly, "this storm really is over." 2 days later, the sky over Portland was clear, but the war had just shifted indoors. The boardroom on the 40th floor of Rowe Industries Tower glowed with the sterile brightness of glass and ambition. Screens flickered, voices murmured. At the head of the table, Sterling Rowe stood in a dark suit that still smelled faintly of hospital antiseptic. He hadn't been home since that night. Sleep had become a luxury he refused to buy. Across from him, a dozen directors shuffled papers and exchanged wary glances. And at the far end, sitting as if nothing in the world could touch him, was Graham Vance. Perfect tie, smug, calm, predator's smile. Vance leaned back in his chair. "You made quite the scene, Sterling. SEC filings, public disclosure. You've turned a private misunderstanding into a corporate bloodbath." Sterling's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like glass. "A misunderstanding doesn't forge my name. It doesn't destroy a woman's life or leave 2 children hungry in the rain." Vance smirked. "You're letting sentiment run your empire now. Last I checked, compassion doesn't raise stock value." "No," Sterling said, walking slowly to the window, watching sunlight bleed over the skyline. "But conscience keeps it from collapsing." The general counsel cleared her throat. "Mr. Rowe, we've verified your claims. The documents were indeed falsified. However, Vance is threatening to sue for wrongful termination and slander. Let him." Vance's smile faltered. "You'd drag your company through months of litigation just to make a point." Sterling turned, his reflection fractured in the glass. "It's not a point. It's a promise." He placed a folder on the table, signed affidavits, audit logs, and transfer proofs. "You bought silence with other people's suffering, Vance. You took everything decent this company once stood for and called it strategy." The room went still. Even the air vents seemed to hold their breath. Vance rose slowly, his voice low, venomous. You self-righteous hypocrite. You'd destroy yourself to save one broken woman. Sterling met his gaze. Not destroy, rebuild. You confuse ruin with renewal. Vance laughed dry and dangerous. Do you even know what you're risking? One press leak and investors will gut this place. Then they can have the bones, Sterling said. I'd rather run a company that breathes truth than one that chokes on lies. He tapped the folder once final. Effective immediately, your shares are frozen pending investigation. Security will escort you out. For a long moment, Vance didn't move. Then his mask cracked, rage boiling beneath composure. You think you've won? He hissed. You've only traded one storm for another. Sterling's jaw tightened. Maybe. But this time I'm not standing under an umbrella while someone else drowns. He nodded to security. 2 guards stepped forward. Vance slammed his briefcase shut, glare sharp enough to wound, and strode toward the door. As it closed behind him, the silence he left behind was the kind that hums like thunder retreating into distance. Sterling exhaled slowly, the fight bleeding out of him. He looked at the directors, their faces a mix of awe and unease. The board will meet again tomorrow, he said quietly. But next time we'll start with integrity. He gathered the papers, slipped them under his arm, and left the room. Outside, sunlight hit his face for the first time in days. The air tasted like clean metal, cold, sharp new. For the first time since the storm, Sterling Rowe wasn't running from the past. He was walking straight into the future, unafraid to get wet. The hospital was quieter than he remembered. No alarms, no rushing footsteps, just the slow rhythm of machines breathing beside the living. Sterling stepped into Maeve's room, the sunlight spilling through blinds and pale ribbons. The red lantern still sat by her bed, dim but unbroken. Maeve was awake this time, weak but fully there. Her eyes met his, clear and cautious. You look different, she murmured. He smiled faintly. Maybe I finally slept. She studied his face, searching for the old arrogance. It was gone. What remained was raw, tired honesty. They told me what you did, the company, the man who forged your name. It's over, he said quietly. He's gone. Maeve nodded, her expression unreadable. That won't undo the years, I know, he whispered. But maybe it can stop the next ones from breaking. Silence stretched, soft, not cruel. The kind that waits for truth instead of punishing it. Then she said, barely audible, You carried me through a storm, and you built lanterns from nothing, he answered. Seems we both learned what light costs. Her lips curved, small but real, and what it's worth. At the edge of the bed, the twins stirred, blinking awake. Lila reached out, placing her tiny hand over both of theirs. Can we go home now? She asked. Maeve and Sterling exchanged a look, fragile, new, unspoken. He squeezed her hand gently. Yeah, he said, in voice trembling with the weight of what home finally meant. I think we can. A week later, the air smelled of thawed snow and sunlight. The city had shaken off its storm, and for the first time in months, Portland felt alive again. The small brick house on Haven Street waited under a pale blue sky, 2 stories, white porch smoke curling softly from the chimney. Sterling stood by the open car door, watching as Maeve stepped out slowly, bundled in his oversized coat. Her color had returned. Her walk was fragile, but her eyes were bright. This isn't one of your penthouses, she murmured. He smiled. No marble, no press, no ghosts. Just ours if you want it. The twins burst past him, squealing down the walkway. Mama, there's a swing in the yard. Maeve's breath hitched as she looked up at the house. Curtains glowed gold from inside. Through the window, sunlight fell over mismatched furniture, some new, some lovingly used. On the kitchen counter, 2 grilled cheese sandwiches waited, steam rising. She turned toward him. You did all this with a little help, he said. The waitress from the diner insisted we owed her a story with a happy ending. Maeve's lips curved, soft and stunned. You never stop fixing things, do you? He shook his head. Not this time. This time I'm just building. For a moment she said nothing, just stood in the doorway, her daughter's laughter echoing through the halls. Then she whispered, "You can stay. For now." He nodded, accepting the grace in that single cautious phrase. For now is enough. Inside, Ren tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, come see our room." The word froze him for a beat, then melted something deeper than pride. He followed them upstairs, sunlight flooding the staircase. Maeve lingered below fingers, tracing the doorframe, her eyes catching the red lantern Sterling had hung above it. Its glow was soft, steady home light. And for the first time in 6 years, Maeve Carter stepped fully inside a house that didn't feel borrowed. The smell of toast and coffee filled the small kitchen, drifting through open curtains into a sunlit morning. Maeve stood by the counter, her hair loose, cheeks touched with color again. She wore one of Sterling's shirts, 2 big sleeves, rolled up the kind of imperfection that looked like peace. Sterling flipped pancakes at the stove, pretending not to notice her watching. The twins sat at the table, coloring on napkins, their laughter spilling into every corner like music. "This house sounds alive," Maeve said softly. "It was waiting for you," he replied. She smiled faintly, eyes tracing the red lantern hanging above the kitchen doorway. "You still have it." "Some lights," he said, "deserve to stay." He slid a plate toward her, grilled cheese, golden and crisp. She blinked, surprised. "Really, again?" he shrugged. "The night everything changed started with grilled cheese. Feels like the right way to keep it going." Maeve laughed, quiet but real, the kind that reached her eyes. "Maybe the world doesn't end in storms after all." Sterling looked at her, then at the girls, their crayons scattered like confetti. "No," he said, voice low. "Sometimes it ends in breakfast." The twins giggled, clinking their cups of orange juice. Outside, the snow had melted into grass, the swing creaking softly in the wind. Maeve tore a piece of bread, offered it to Sterling. So she said, "What do we call this?" He met her gaze. "Home," he said simply. And as sunlight spilled across their table, the red lantern swayed gently above them, its glow no longer fighting the dark, just dancing with the morning. By evening, the house glowed in soft gold. The twins sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a box of old receipts and colored paper spread around them. "We're making new stars," Ren announced proudly. "Mama says every room needs one." Maeve smiled from the couch, her blanket pooled at her feet. "Only if they hang straight," she teased. Sterling crouched beside the girls, clumsy with the folding at first. "Corners together, right?" Lila giggled. "You're terrible at this." "Good," he said. "Means I'll need lessons. Keeps me around longer." They laughed soft and easy, the kind of laughter that didn't echo, it stayed. The room filled with the gentle rustle of paper and the faint hiss of the fireplace. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the roof like quiet applause. When they finished, a dozen tiny stars swung from the ceiling, some perfect, some crooked, all beautiful. Their edges caught the lamplight, scattering it in warm dancing patterns across the walls. Maeve looked up at them, eyes shining. "You remember what I told them?" Sterling nodded. "Stars don't fall, they wait." She reached for his hand. "Then let's not make them wait anymore." He squeezed her fingers, his voice low. "Not one more night." The twins ran to switch off the lights. The room dimmed and the paper stars shimmered in the dark, glowing softly like memories forgiven. For the first time in 6 years, no one was missing from the picture. Just light laughter and the quiet promise that this time the stars would stay. Night settled over Haven Street like a sigh. The snow had vanished, leaving puddles that mirrored the stars above. Through the window, the little brick house glowed softly, paper stars, and one red lantern pulsing in rhythm, a heartbeat of its own. Sterling stood outside for a moment, coat open, the cold brushing his face. He could see them through the glass. Maeve reading on the couch, the twins curled against her, laughter rising every few seconds. warmth and motion framed by light. He whispered to the night, "You waited long enough." When he stepped inside, the air smelled of vanilla and paper. Maeve looked up, smiling. "You locked the door?" He nodded, hanging his coat. "For once, I want to keep everything in." She closed her book, voice soft. "And if the storm comes again?" He glanced at the red lantern above the window, its glow steady as breath. "Then we'll light more stars." Maeve reached for his hand. "Deal." The twins had fallen asleep before the fireplace, the paper stars casting tiny constellations across their faces. Sterling lifted a blanket over them, his movements slow, reverent. He sat beside Maeve, shoulder to shoulder, the kind of silence between them that meant peace, not distance. Outside, the wind sighed across the empty street, but it didn't sound lonely anymore. The lantern flickered once, twice, then steadied, its glow reflected in their eyes. And for the first time, the story that began in a diner's cold neon ended not in thunder, but in the gentle hum of light refusing to die.